We're up. We're going right now.
Well, Nick Flores, thank you very much for inviting me
Absolutely.
to be
It's
a
my
part
pleasure.
of this podcast. I always get a little bit nervous.
No, completely understandable.
But I'm really grateful to be able to be here and to talk about the Philosophy Forum. Let me start by introducing the keynote speaker, or who will be the keynote speaker on Wednesday. His name is Win Wiley, aka Patagonia. And so Patagonia is his, how to put it, the name that he uses, that he started using about, I'd say, 4 years ago. And I'll read the intro to what he'll be speaking about. But you'll hear that during the keynote if you come on Wednesday, this coming April 26th, 7 p.m. In the Van Duzer Theater. This is free for students. You have to have your student ID, and
but you can get in for free.
But you can get in for free, and you can actually get tickets emailed if you're interested. Even before.
And what is the price for just general public?
$25, which is not bad at all. And let me say a word. I'll just read the introduction that you will hear. Patagonia is a drag queen, environmentalist, and community organizer. They're originally from the corn of Nebraska and now live over the mountains in Bend, Oregon. Patty was born on a backpacking trip. This is the alternate persona 4 years ago and has been sunburned ever since. By the way, there's some really good material out there that you can go to. If for some sad reason you're not able to make it to the keynote, there's material you can get to look at what they're about. Let me use that term because it's just the more appropriate way of doing it. Patty is the co-founder of the Outdoorist Oath, a nonprofit that creates outdoor community for BIPOC, queer, and underrepresented groups. She also sits on the development committee for Brave Trails, a summer camp for LGBTQ plus youth. Patty believes in the power of drag as a form of activism, largely and beautifully and powerfully activist. Over the past 3 years, she and her community have raised over $1 million for queer, BIPOC, and environmental nonprofits. Her drag is often inspired by queerness in the natural world and countering the traditional masculine outdoor narratives. She's frequently, it says upcycling, maybe recycling, climbing rope, and sleeping bags into the gayest little hiking outfits you ever did see. Please welcome, right? So this is the person who will be speaking in Van Duzer Theater tomorrow on the Cal Poly Humboldt campus. The Philosophy Forum, for whom Patty is the keynote, started, as a philosophy forum in 2012, but it was called the Ethics Forum before that. And I think it started in 2002. I decided that it was about time that people became familiar with the fact that philosophy is a practical discipline. Human beings, we're reflective, we have interests, we have values. How are we going to be able to discuss things in a critical but a respectful and constructive way to show the merit, the importance of philosophy? Because if you don't learn how to think reasonably and to support what you value, why you value what you value, and have these conversations with other people, well, that's when things tend to fall apart. And I'm going to take some water here. One of the things that I've noticed is in polling my students, and I've been here since 1989. Most of them, by the time they get to college, have not had a single philosophy course. Not one philosophy course. Which is really, of course, I'm a philosopher, so I'm going to just say that's
a little biased.
Yeah, a little biased, but it's shameful, really, because that's where you learn kind of the skills, not just of reasoning. Sometimes people say arguing, but that kind of has that kind of nasty flair to it. But reasoning, and you have to reason according to certain basic rules, right? Guidelines of logic, critical thinking, and in order to have a valid kind of position, you also have to be able to support that with evidence. That's what makes your position not just valid, consistent according to rules of reasoning, but sound. That's how we have conversations in a way that allows us to basically implement the sorts of policies, the sorts of protocols that we think we ought to. And students aren't trained in this. So I decided that it was time for the university. It started in my department, because of course I'm in the philosophy department. I decided to create a forum where these ideas, these issues were discussed, tying it directly to things in the culture, to news, to stories, to events, and philosophy's alive, and it keeps moving as a growing discipline, as human beings continue to evolve. Philosophy does too. So let me just tell you some of the beginning topics when the Philosophy Forum was the Ethics Forum. Just real quickly: biomedical ethics, hate, some social, psychological, and philosophical dimensions, the ethics and politics of healthcare, marriage equality, persons living on the margin, privacy, safety, and globalization, addiction, desire, disease, or choice, global warming, a moral controversy, ethics, violence, and revolution, war, peace, and globalization, life, death, and medical ethics, on democracy, and the very first one, nonviolence, terrorism, and war. And I think that was in 2002,
Well, so you started this with the outright desire not to shy away from any controversial topics. You wanted to have an authentic conversation regarding really anything and everything.
Well, yes, that's exactly what I wanted to do. Focusing on a theme, focusing on some topic that students could learn more about. And there are already topics that people are interested in frequently, but it's hard to know how to talk about those subjects unless you have some kind of forum, some kind of, how to put it, some kind of exposure to the topic, and you're able to, and not just do the research, but come up with ways of being able to evaluate what it is that's before you. Now, this was the Ethics Forum, and in 2012, we had a need to broaden the scope, because ethics, of course, is the part of philosophy that deals with what's called loosely the good life. We link it to things like morality, right? Right and wrong in the moral sense. But the first speaker for the Philosophy Forum was Vic Stenger. Sadly, he's passed. But the topic for that first year was science and spirituality, falling awake to diversity. And just to give you some idea, this particular keynote was an atheist. He was one of the new atheists. Also trained. Her training wasn't in philosophy. His training was as a physicist, right? So, yeah, he had definitely a point of view, and one that's not necessarily popular with a lot of people who are people of faith. I loved this. Great way of starting. Huge audience for that time, and it was followed up with 3 presentations from people in the community and faculty. I have it somewhere here. Did I put that away? Hopefully not. You don't mind, I'm going to scramble a little.
No.
Where did I put that? Let's see. Too many things can be. It's not in here. Thank you for your patience. Hang on.
Absolutely.
I don't know where I put it. It's just yeah, here it is. Sorry, of course. The very, very last place I looked, but naturally. So, I mean, for example, and this is when the forum was a full year. We had presenters, Susan Armstrong, one of my colleagues. She's now retired. Awesome person. Amazing. I'm just going to say a word about her. I mean, she does, she was doing cutting edge philosophy. First of all, as a woman, focusing on environmental ethics, animal rights, when they weren't taken seriously as disciplines, as something that we should even be concerned about. So she's written books on this, and she's also, in addition to being a retired philosopher, she's a priest. She went back to school to take I was going to say to take a degree as a priest. No, you don't take a degree. You know, she's for the Episcopal Church. Right? So she's a priest in the church. So it was really nice to have somebody who's like a very, very devout atheist and quite, in some ways, very, I don't want to say dogmatic, but, you know, just...
she was very much ingrained in that way.
He was.
Oh.
Stenger and Susan Armstrong is not at all dogmatic. You know, she's very philosophical in her ability to listen to people's views, to respond as respectfully and reasonably, of course, using evidence and logic-based reasoning, as anybody possibly could. But she's a person of faith. And so she's one of these beautiful people who can see the compatibility of reason and faith, and of course, by extension, science and spirituality, right? So she presented lovely. I don't want to underspeak the other presenters. Scott Sattler also, sadly, has passed on. He was an MD and a Sufi practitioner. He took a Fulbright when he was very young, I believe in Turkey, and became a devout Sufist, focusing on philosophy, the unique Sufist philosophy of love. And I'm not going to, want to take too much time, but just this is exciting. That's as the first place where we started. And I spoke on, wait a minute, hold on a second, Susan. Science and Spirituality, Scott Sattler, also a doctor, medical doctor, speaking on mysticism, the search for truth beyond reason. And then I spoke on Confucian ritual as body language of self, society, and spirit. And then Benjamin, last but not least, Schaefer, also teaching in the Department of Philosophy, spoke on is atheism a matter of faith? So it was just fascinating. But I should say, back up a little bit. Part of the Philosophy Forum, whether it was here or how we do it right now, can be taken as a one-unit course, right? So you can take, and any student can do this, take the Philosophy Forum course. It's a Philosophy 480 seminar in philosophy, right? 1 unit, credit, no credit. And the way we run it now, you come to 4 meetings a semester. That's in the fall now. because I'm in the process of retiring as well. I'm what they call FERPing, right? What's that? It sounds very strange, but Faculty Early Retirement Program. I'm in that program, and I have 4 more falls to be teaching. But I'll also be active in running and supporting the Philosophy Forum. And for as long as they'll let me, I'll try to be a part of that. Before moving on, I was remiss if I didn't say this right from the start. The Philosophy Forum is sponsored largely, has been, for some time, actually, I would say. Let's see, what year was that? 2017. By Center Arts at our university. And I thank the people at Center Arts profusely because their support has been absolutely invaluable. And okay, so Center Arts, we ought to give a
little shout out.
Yes, that's right. And also the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences have been very supportive. We'll talk about this in a bit. We have in, let's see, 2021, we had George Yancey. I'm going to go through these a bit. And George Yancey is an African-American philosopher. He is an amazing speaker. He was our keynote. And I'd like to say that this was a part of the presidential speaker series as well. So it was supported not just by the college, but also by the president's office, and much appreciated by me and by everybody for that kind of support. So this is not just a philosophy forum. It really has become a part of the university. We've had speakers from many departments, or I'd say quite a few anyway, different speakers. On campus, we've had speakers from the community. It's kind of gone through some changes, but so we have the course that students can take and hear presentations and discussions and see videos, podcasts, and the like. And then we have the keynote now, of course.
So that was a later edition, was the keynote speaker?
No, the keynote became center to the 2012, the first year with Vic Stenger. But even when we had the Ethics Forum, which was a much smaller kind of production, we had members even there from the community, different professions, speaking about these topics. And it depends what year it was.
And so starting with the Ethics Forum, it sounds like it kind of started out of a need to create some critical discourse amongst your students and to get them to think critically about this variety of topics, even back then. And that you said that was 2002?
Yeah, I think it's 2002. I'd have to go back to this. Very cumbersome. Sorry, I've got lots of...
You came well prepared.
Oh, well, it says... Yep. It looks like 2003. But 2003. The actual planning started in 2002, I believe. 2000.
And so you felt like that was lacking even back then, that there wasn't this ability to look at a topic and formulate a critical argument or think about it in a rational way and support your standing with evidence. You felt like that was lacking even back then, early 2000s.
Oh, it still is.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. It seems like it's almost gotten worse now. It seems like we are less able to have a serious discussion without feelings and emotion getting involved and be able to look at our argument and see if it's sound and look at the other person's argument and see if it's sound and have an actual discussion about something.
That's right. That's right. And I've traveled widely. I've been to a lot of different countries. I've presented in many, many places. And one of the things that, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but one of the things that Americans are known for, at least generally speaking, is we have opinions. That might be mine. I should probably turn it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was my phone over there chirping.
Sorry, I'm going to turn it off. We have opinions, and we're willing. We want to take a stand. We're trained. We train our kids. We train our students. We train people to, take a view, take a stand.
And it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. Just take a stand.
Right, and that's the thing, And everybody has a right to vote. Everybody has a right to an opinion. But if you want to actually ground your opinion in something that goes beyond just what you think, right? It's why you think it, and at the very base, what is the value or values that you're promoting that are entailed in your view, in your position? Much of the time, people don't even know what that is. They're like, well, I don't know. They have a certain view of, just think about some of the key ethicists, really. In the Western tradition, you have people like Kant. What did he value? This is really a can't-do philosophy like this, but there's something, autonomy, right? Freedom. The utilitarians, happiness, but social utility. So you have, even in this thing called ethics, a variety of different, not just views, but basic values embedded in principles that are used to make decisions about how to live. People don't even recognize that. It's like, well, especially when you start doing things like comparative religion. I teach ancient Chinese philosophy a lot, right? And I've taught Indian philosophy. And when you start looking at other so-called, let me just stretch a term here, faith traditions, there are people all over the world have been trying to figure things out, or have this sense of something that goes beyond what we might call the self, the family, the community, the nation, something beyond life, and maybe even something beyond death, right? There's a sense and kind of urging to reflect and seek answers. Now, the problem is that if you just have the answer without having the reasons for why you have that answer, that's called dogmatism. You just holding a view. But why do you believe in that view? Well, because it's true.
That feels rampant today.
Right.
It's true because I believe it's true.
Right. Exactly. And it's okay. Well, why is it true? It's because
I believe it.
It's just like, that's called a circular argument. It's like you just, and this is unfortunate. And I think it goes back to what I said earlier about philosophy not being key in American schools, starting in most American schools, I want to say, from the get-go. We should be teaching our students critical thinking, ethics. And there's a branch of philosophy called metaphysics. Views of reality, they are diverse, right? We have a view of reality that we simply overlay on everybody. Like, this is reality. This is reality. This is what's real. Well, no, that's what you conceive as being real. But if you look at other philosophies, other religions, they have a very different way of understanding what is real, what is good, and going all the way down the line as far as the philosophical branches are concerned. So, it's unfortunate, and now more than ever, as one of my colleagues today was just expressing how he lost a very, very dear friend just because of just extreme differences, and what I think, I would just say, I'm not going to fill in the details too much, but what would be considered, morally problematic. If you hang around somebody who's racist and uses really bigoted, demeaning language, whether it's to people of color, including Native Americans, of course, in this community, women, if you start using disrespectful language targeting any particular group, it's like, wait a minute. When you hear people do that, it's like, what? Why? What are they doing? It just, you can't get a conversation off the ground, right? And perhaps it's like, oh, I didn't know I was doing that. Or, well, because women are stupid. Women are not as intelligent as men. White people are smarter than black people. Just these kinds of views that we hold that if you really look at it with any precision, it's just not true. You give people an opportunity, they thrive. So that's a pitch for philosophy. And I'm very very dedicated to this for all kinds of reasons. But, we don't have to just say what we think. We have to look at why we think what we think and what is the ground for that? What is the reason? Once we know the reasons for why we think what we think or we value what we value, what our interests are, then we can have a conversation. And we might be like, wow, I never saw it that way. I never was able to really, because we don't listen, to other people. We just automatically assume that if they're different, then they're wrong or they're abnormal, not just statistically, but in some deeper personal way, perhaps a moral way. It's like, how can you? I mean, I see this in a lot of faith traditions where why would anybody believe that? And not what I believe. Why would anybody believe that? And not what my particular faith tradition calls on us to believe. It's because people are different and they have different ways of understanding. And if you learn about those differences respectfully, you might really learn something new, not just about other people, but about yourself. So that's part of what this forum aims to do. I know that poster, I posted a lot of these around campus. And they were torn down. So there were at least some people who are not pleased with that presentation.
And for people that aren't aware, it's the Win Wiley Patagonia. Patagonia is the alter ego, in
Correct.
a sense. It's a drag queen.
Correct.
And so
she's a drag queen.
She's a drag queen. Yeah. You think that it was kind of a hateful act, that people were pulling that down because of what the keynote speaker stands for?
I'm thinking maybe, but again, it might have only been.
They might have just been assholes, yeah.
Right, it's just like, whoa, what's that? It's just because we're a Cal Poly now, as you know, and a lot of what we have been doing is respectful of diversity and inclusion, right? But some people just are not having it for whatever reason. And so I don't know what the reason. I mean, I didn't catch the person or ask. I mean, who knows? But I noticed that just immediate prejudice without knowing who Win Wiley or who Patagonia is or what they're about.
Well, you want to speak about a controversial subject today. I mean, the drag stuff seems to have polarized people into a number of different camps.
No kidding. Oh my goodness, I've been for as long as I can remember. Let me just be safe and say quite a long time. I've been an advocate or ally, I'm going to say, for the LGBTQ I plus community, because I think it's a basic civil right to be able to. It's the basic civil right to be able to live as you see fit, as long as what you do is in flagrant violation of the law or violation of the law, or if it's not immoral. I mean, what the heck? But people automatically see something like that and think, well, that's immoral. By definition, they think it's immoral to drag or discussions about race. That's another really poignant topic. That's why I'm so glad to have George Yancey come to speak to this, because it's being brought to the level of awareness more pervasively. Racism, sexism, they're being brought to the level of awareness, and that's painful. Growing pains, sir. But that's how we learn. This is how we develop. You have to look at the truth, the facts, the positions, if you will, not stifle them, right? And if something is not good in our history, why not face it so we don't make the mistake again? So we realize that we violated basic civil rights of so many people or devalued them as human beings. So we don't do that again. We don't make that mistake. We First of all, we can only then recognize and perhaps apologize for what it is, make restitution to the degree that we're able. But what you see now, and it's political, is all get out and has other facets, whether it's anti-trans or anti-gay, African American, Native American, whatever, anti-female, whatever it is. You have this trend of keeping things as so-called traditional as possible, so we don't actually learn about the history in a way that would very likely change how we think about our history, about ourselves, and about our future. So this is an opportunity for growth. But growth involves pain. And I think that's what we're going through. And you don't just brush it under the carpet. You don't just sweep it away, because this is what's happening, and it's important, and it's positive. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm over here thinking, do you, in terms of race and sex, I guess would be the two primary ones right now, do you think that the problems facing those areas are more predominant today, or we have a bigger magnifying glass over them now because we have the technology to amplify a case of whatever so that you see it now, it's more in your face? Or do you think it's just more prevalent?
Well, I think, if you're talking about the history, say the history of, and again, this is short shrift naturally, but the history of, African Americans in this culture, in this country, they started off as property. They were owned. Property. And, we're not that old, as far as countries go, travel in Europe, travel in China or India, just. So I think I think there's increased awareness, and needs to be an increased awareness about the history, about the topics. And this is the kind of thing we discuss in the Philosophy Forum and did in the Ethics Forum. And you say, well, you don't want to make people feel bad about, well, if there's something in our history that is bad, we should feel bad.
Even today?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if something's wrong and we support that, if we practice that, and again, this is just a kind of a theoretical position because I'm not nailing it down to, any particulars. I mean, you say being a racist or being sexist or whatever, just, then you don't do it. If it's wrong, especially if you realize it's wrong, then you don't do it. But you have people looking at, someone like Win Wiley and his alter persona Patagonia, and they're saying, that's wrong. Like there's some kind of something immoral or perverse about someone using drag or any or being gay or whatever it is. That's where we need to have the conversations, and that's where the awareness needs to increase, because if you start having those conversations, you would be surprised how people like, I never really thought about it that way. I never really looked at it that way. I was just thinking, you're probably way too young for this, but do you remember an artist named Liberace?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, was he not doing drag? Of sorts, flamboyant. I mean, not drag, obviously, but he was a very, very flamboyant entertainer. That was when I was a kid, right? When I was really young. So it's not that. I think there's often. I'm not quite sure why I brought that up. It just seemed to me like just such a good example of someone who wouldn't be mainstream as far as a male entertainer is concerned, but. He was an entertainer and people accepted him, even then. So it's almost like, to me, sometimes there's backpedaling in some of these areas. I'm not trying to tell people what to believe. I just want them to look at why they believe what they do. What's shoring up their practices, if you will. And sometimes you might be surprised. So
Isn't there a hopeful way to look at that and to see how far we've come in that sense? Because nowadays you could point to, I mean, there are a number of famous men who dress in a more feminine manner, and that's just what it is.
Right.
Nobody bats an eye at it.
Right. Well, even when I was young, there was this group of human beings called, at least in the U.S., right, and actually also in Western Europe and various other places, called hippies. Now, if you look at some, and go look at some of the entertainers, right? They looked considerably so-called feminine by certain masculine standards that have changed. Look at the founding fathers. They had bloody bouffants, whatever those, like buns sometimes, little bows and frilly shirts. Wow. So these things change. They change, and the thing is, and to get back to your question, what's happening, I think, and it's been happening a lot, whether it be about sex, gender issues or race issues, is we're becoming aware more and more. There's more of a forum out there, a cultural forum for discussing these things. It's still a tricky business. I'm not going to say that there's any, standard right or wrong way of looking at things. Insofar as coming up, having a particular conclusion, but it's really how you reason about it, how you think about it, what you're willing to look at, and sometimes looking at things can be quite painful. But if you don't, how do you know what you think? How do you know what that thing is that you might be criticizing or embracing? That's what this forum is about. Hearing people and their views. Do you mind if I read some of these things? Okay. I'm enjoying this, by the way. Thank you. I was so nervous. I thought, oh my God.
Once you get rolling, it kind of settles in. You're like, okay, it's not as bad.
Yeah, okay. So, this keynote speaker speaking on Wednesday, Patagonia.
If you hold that a little bit more that way, they'll be able to see it. You pointed at this camera, though.
Oh.
Yeah, that's on you.
Do you want me
to?
Yes, please. Yeah, you're actually closer. So what? Do you want to hold that up?
I can do it on this one, and it'll show up.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there's a camera on each of us.
That's cool.
So this is the keynote speaker coming this Wednesday.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I really encourage people to attend. I think it's exciting. And I've seen some of his work, some of their work. Her work actually is Patagonia. So sorry about misgendering. Last year, and I'm going to go reverse. I started with number one, right? The very first Philosophy Forum, just because that's where we started. And we had that kind of standard protocol of having not just a keynote, but classes and visiting presenters and things like that. But it's changed over time. 21-22, Whitney Phillips, who is the author of This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things, mapping the relationship between online trolling and mainstream culture, and she does it beautifully. She's also written some other books that are very, very good, but I've read this one. She was a philosophy major when HSU was HSU, right? So she took her degree in philosophy from our university and wrote this book, which is basically the first of its kind. Brilliant, showing the relationship in the almost interdependency between trolling and what happens in the larger culture. So I recommend that highly, that title.
Trolling in the sense of it has a negative impact on people at large?
No, actually the internet trolling, starting with the internet trolling. And now, I mean, think about it, how that would be, it's just, it's, I can't say any of this as well as Whitney was able to, but just the influence between and the mentality involved in that right? Nobody will necessarily consider themselves a troll unless they actually are self-avowed trolls or whatever, but just how much this is pervasive. And now we know it's not just political. It's out of the news. It's international. I mean, this stuff is happening because we have this new medium, if you're just talking about the internet itself, but all these different forms of media, all of the, I mean, and think what comes with that. And I'm departing a little bit about from this speaker, but just what comes with that. I mean, again, I go back to when I was a kid. I'd sit down and watch Walter Cronkite, or you had 3 news channels, right? And there was the news, and okay, that's what's going on in the world, right? But now we have to be in the position. We have to be artists of discernment, because we're getting all kinds of information from all kinds of places. And we have the scroll mentality, right? It does. Well, how are you? So now I think, I'm stepping on my words, but now philosophy is more important than ever, because we have to look at that stuff and say, well, Of course, the flip side of that, and I think part of the extreme reaction against this need to be reflective, discerning, is just thinking all news is fake news, or all so-called truths are subjective. They have no real grounding outside of, like we talked about earlier, well, that's just because that's what you think, or that's just because that's what you believe. And that's just, you can never have a conversation that way. It's like, oh, you believe this, I don't believe that. Okay, that's where we are. So wait a minute. Look at why we believe it. Have a conversation. Not everything is fake news, right? But it takes some investigating. You have to actually look at it. And again, we've seen this surely in our culture, where science has become the bad guy. I'm a person of faith, but I also believe in science. I also believe in ethics. Being able to have these sorts of different frameworks for understanding this larger thing we call reality, and to see it as a framework. So Whitney Phillips.
I wanted to stop you there for a second, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind it.
Do you think we can have a rational discussion? Do you think through embracing philosophy, through learning how to handle critical thought, do you think we can go down that route if we don't establish objective truths? Or do you think we need some foundation first? Because it seems like people, reality is subjective, truth is subjective. We have eroded all of these foundational ideas up to this point in history, right, and now we're trying to rewrite them and also build upon them. Yeah. Do you think that having a shaky ground is a problem?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. No, of course not. I mean, I don't know what you mean by shaky ground, but not everything is subjective, right? Certain rules of reasoning are cross-cultural. You tell somebody, a rational person from wherever, that something, fill in whatever that something is, right, is true, and then you say the exact same thing is not true. What you've done is you've uttered a contradiction, right? So because something can't be true, and that very same thing not true at the same time, right? This is how we think. And we catch people in contradictions. We know when we hear it. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're contradicting ourselves. We don't realize it. That's just one example of the kinds of rules of reasoning, if you will, that are objective. They're cross-cultural. One of the things science gives us is a way of, testing for soundness. What is it we think? We have some ideas, some hypothesis. We test it. We do experiments. We have a particular scientific method. And that method, by the way, is cross-cultural for scientists all over the world. that's the ground, if you will. And I just used examples that are fairly safe because there are categories of understanding. There are certain ways of investigating the world we live in. That doesn't necessarily come up with some absolute or conclusive truth, but we can say something is supported more or less. And so, limits of reliability, we can say this is true, within this sort of with this margin of error or whatever. So those are foundation. The tricky bit is when you start talking about the good life, right? When you talk about what is morally right, what is moral, what is immoral, what it means to live a good life, to live well, it tends to look, and I would want to say be a lot more subjective, because the things we just talked about are cognitive, right? Establishing validity, establishing soundness, having methods for being able to pursue those things. But when it comes to values, our interests, the things we do to pursue those, they're clearly not cross-cultural, at least on the face of it. Western. I gave you a couple of examples of how, you have Kantian values of freedom, utilitarian values of happiness, but that's it's Western. You have in ancient China something called Tao, the way, right? And reality is seen as not a thing, not an object, but something that's fluid, that's changing, that's creative. And so you have these different ways of understanding. And that's metaphysics, right? Even what reality is. But once we kind of come up with some kind of question, some kind of theme, some kind of focus, narrowing in on what that involves, looking at it reflectively. I keep liking to say critically and constructively. Then you can have a conversation within those limits. But what we see, and this is just the human way, to get back to your original, this is just the human way. We're diverse. Not just historically, but obviously even now, cross-culturally, we're diverse, but we're living in a world that's linked by telecommunications. It's linked in a way that it's never been before, and sometimes for ill. Going back to the trolling and, some of the political stuff that you were aware of is,
There's a lot out there.
Oh, it's sabotaging. I mean, it's sabotaging anything. I mean, sometimes it's just sabotaging our faith, I think, in ourselves, in our world.
Well, that's another aspect, is the failure of institutions and the undermining of them, right? That's come out through COVID and through a number of different things. Is it seems like people's faith in these previously reliable institutions has now fallen. Like the Walter Cronkite, like this is what the news is,
right?
And now nobody knows what the news is, because it's one day it's this and the next day it's this, and it's like, well, how wasn't it just this the other day? And now that it's this thing and we're changing that.
Yeah.
And people stop believing, okay, well, we could just change it on a dime. I'm not going to trust what you're saying anymore.
Exactly. And it's sort of a balancing act, isn't it? Because we differ and have different interests, different standards for valuing different things, for knowing things differently, for being in relationship in very different ways. That doesn't reduce completely to pure subjectivity. Again, I bring up the importance of critical thinking, the importance of not just logic-based reasoning, but of course the investigation of what is sound. You got to look to the world for that, right? But you name it, you define it. So, yeah, it opens the Pandora's box to something that's much more complex. Like our world. Our world is complex. It didn't used to be. When I first started teaching philosophy, basically, introduction to philosophy books were called Introduction to Philosophy. What were they? Standard white male philosophers. And don't get me wrong, those aren't bad. Those philosophers were brilliant. But really, accurately, that would be Introduction to Western Philosophy. And even more precisely, Introduction to mainstream Western philosophy, because in the so-called West, you have all kinds of marginalized communities and groups that are now wanting a voice and deserve to have a voice according to the basic principles of our democracy. So maybe sometimes the things we agree on are pretty vague. I think of some of the Constitution, for example. I mean, some of those, and we're just trying to figure out how to make that work. And what does this mean? How do we apply this? But that's part of the human experience, and I would rather have that and have it be something that isn't, and that we shouldn't just think has a pat solution, than the opposite, because that's where you get your dictatorial, authoritarian, narrow-minded, and frankly, very scary ways of thinking, and leaders that reflect that kind of thinking. And you can see cross-culturally where those the leaders. I don't know. I'm putting my foot in my mouth here, but the leader of North Korea, the leader of the former Soviet Union, currently Russia. I mean, I think those are just a couple of glaring examples from non-Western countries of totalitarian thinking and the implementation of that. And why don't we like that? Because we believe in freedom. We believe in these basic civil rights. And, that's the argument against that is, well, we discussed this in the philosophy forum. It's like, well, it's just a different set of values. But is that all it is? Is there something more basic about human beings that appreciates autonomy, freedom, self-governance, the ability?
Do you think people really want that freedom, though? Because one of the things that has been worrying me recently has been the lack of acceptance of free speech, specifically on college campuses.
Right.
And the pushback to speakers that maybe they don't align with.
Exactly.
And don't feel that they should even have a voice. It seems like people are okay with free speech as long as it aligns with their speech.
Exactly. And make no mistake about it. I've been doing investigations on this for a long time, and it's not the extremes on both left and right are making those mistakes on campuses.
But why is that?
Because it's our way of saying what we believe. And
I know, but colleges used to be, well, obviously I say used to be, but I wasn't there to see it. But the rumor was that colleges back in the day were, foundational for free speech, that they were the ones bringing on these radical speakers that, yeah, we might disagree, but I want to hear you speak so that I can formulate my own opinion and counter what you're saying if I disagree with it.
That's right. That's not what's happening very much anymore. It's more like, drown them out, stamp your feet, or simply uninvite them. Or, there have been some really bad, examples of where people have actually had to be pulled away and taken out, right?
Well, there was that judge speaking at Stanford, and it just devolved into chaos.
Right. And there's also, it's an example. I'm trying to remember, Middlebury, I think there was a speaker that was invited, and he was invited, he was very conservative, but actually changed his mind about a particular thing that, but the students weren't there to hear about his view and why he changed his mind, which would have aligned with theirs if they had bothered to listen. So apparently he was not only driven out, but had to be pulled out by the person who invited him, if I've got the story right, for his own safety. So I go back, do we want freedom? We are free. That's part of, I think, what makes us. It's one of the many things that makes us, our desire for self-governance, for being happy.
Does that worry you at all, though? The desire to drown out dissent or opposition?
I think a lot of people are doing that. I think that's part of the problem, and they're doing it in the name of social justice. And my friend, that is the farthest from the truth. We throw this term around here called fascist. It's not actually technically fascist, but I know what they're talking about.
That word gets thrown around so much
well,
now.
And it's inappropriate. What they mean is something like, I would imagine if you're actually getting it right, probably something like authoritarian, dictatorial. That's but if you look at the method that people are using, they're doing the very same thing. But they're doing it because they're the ones who are thinking that they're promoting this just
inclusive environment,
right? Or the other way around. But it's like, if you look at what people are doing, it's it's really, I think, a problem. Yeah, it's a violation of free speech. It's a and I mean, we have provocateurs out there. People invite people who are want to speak just to be provocative, just to kind of get under people's skin. It gets so complex. But we're talking about being able to respectfully hear another view, and if it's a problem, say why it is. What is it about this view that's problematic? Name it. And then other people say, yeah, maybe that person won't change their mind because their value, whatever it is they value, is just that weighty, and they'll just come up with another argument, maybe if they think about it a little bit more. That's a kind of thing, but it just yeah, so I think human beings, and again, this is very in a way presumptuous, but we have this range of values, this range of interests, and a range of different ways of knowing. I mean, think of Scott Sattler's, knowing beyond mysticism, or some feminists are writing feminist epistemologies, and I don't know if at rock bottom it's going to be some kind of contradiction of what things might be very general, and allow us to have conversations about knowledge in a way that that can be mutually understood. I mean, if we can't even do that, we can't understand each other in any way, shape, or form. But where was I going with this? It was the different values, different ways of knowing. We're diverse beings, and that is how we adapt. That's how we grow. That's how we evolve.
Well, it's ironic because that's not what we want to do. We want to shut out the diversity we disagree with and try to form some unity that we feel is the best path forward.
Yeah, and then you have kind of the paradoxical case in the USA of what in a way unifies us. And again, this is really, really general, is a basic appreciation for, and what ultimately should be respect for, diversity. Look how much headway we've made. I mean, look at some of these topics, kind of ground this. George Yancey, he African-American philosopher, he wrote Across Black Spaces, essays and interviews from an American philosopher. He's written a lot of things, right? But he talks, his presentation was on between pessimism and optimism, white crisis in the forum year on racism and cultural change, right? So this is just an example. It's like, and he released an article in, I believe it was the New York Times, that got, sorry, my nose is itching, got these responses, vitriolic, right? Vitriolic responses from white readers. I mean, just horrible responses. And he speaks about this, and what this is important to recognize. Right? We have to become aware of this kind of thing, so that we in particular, I'm referring to myself as a white person, can make sure that it doesn't happen. Again, well, how do we do that? Certainly on some grand cultural level, my gosh, I mean, in checking myself to the, checking myself on the kind of language I use, kind of assumptions I make about people, particularly people who are different.
I'm sorry to interrupt. He received those responses in turn. What did he specifically write that caused those responses to come his way?
He wrote, and I'm going to look at my phone here because I think it's Dear White America. I think that's the name of it, but I want to make absolutely sure. It was brief. It was just an editorial piece, I believe. Let me just go to it, if you don't mind. Is this okay?
No, absolutely,
okay.
Yeah. So he wrote something specifically directed towards white people, and then got some backlash.
Yeah,
as a result
backlash is a mild way of putting it. Dear White. I think, let me see this. No, it's got, I'm missing up. Here, let me get this right. I feel really bad not having this at the top.
No, bro.
I had my students read this, right? It's on my course site. I'm just going to go George Yancey. Right, here we go. These are the books. Let's see. Sorry, I'm taking so long on this. Dear White. I'm just going to put that there. Okay, come on now.
I can add it in afterwards. It's not. I definitely would like to read it later, but it's not incredibly pressing.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm just embarrassed.
Oh, no. That's all part of the podcast. Sometimes it takes a turn and...
Oh, my gosh. But anyway, the substance of it was basically calling us on our prejudice, on our treatment generally of African Americans, our response, and so he got this huge backlash. People who were not being respectful, horrible things said. So bring this to the level of awareness. Changes that have been taking place since long before civil rights movement, and continue. And we see this. It's painful. It's like, because we're being held accountable for something that we don't want to be held accountable for, even though we may still be a part of that problem.
But is it a fear of accountability, or is it a recognition of changing times? I mean, did you feel, you said that you had to check yourself a little bit after reading that, right?
No, I was right. I agreed with it. I was doing this forum on the topic, obviously. So I was sad to hear that he received such, such threats, such just horrible.
But that's kind of a blank statement to make, that white people in general, hey, this is a wake-up call for you, right? Because it's not all white people that are racist. It's just racist people that are racist.
Well, that's a good question. I think it's a really good question. I would want to argue, and I think this is part of what Professor Yancey would say, is whether we realize it or not, racism is systemic, which is to say it's a social phenomenon. And so even though you as a particular person may not be racist, you have a burden, a responsibility as a white person to change your culture. Not just to do what so many people, Americans, will do, would just throw up their hands and say, oops, and knock the microphone off. Just like, that's not me. I'm not responsible for that. You're not responsible maybe for being a racist, but you're responsible for not seeing your society as a racist society and not taking responsibility to do whatever you can with commitment to change that. Do you see the difference? I mean,
yeah, no, I've heard that argument. It's just always, I don't know if it's my lack of understanding fundamentally of where that comes from, but the systemic racism thing always causes me to pause because I'm not sure that I buy into that.
Right.
That people, and that if you are silent or even if you're a good person, you're somehow still a part of the problem. You're white.
You're part of the society.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things, the question is, it's an ethical question. Well, what do I do? My colleague was talking about this earlier. What do I do when my friend yet again calls a black person, pejorative term?
But then aren't all people, what if you're a black person and your friend is racist towards X person? Then aren't they part of the problem too?
Well, in a different context, but systematically, African Americans have been marginalized in a way that white people have not. We have been able to presume certain opportunities, certain powers, certain privileges that were simply forbidden to African Americans, and of course, and I use that. These are general categories, but to all women, regardless of race. Just no, you can't vote. That didn't come to pass in the early part of the 20th century, and it was hard won. Why? Because women, actually got out there and fought for it. Right, the suffragettes, women suffered. Were jailed, force fed when they used starving themselves as a way as demonstrating. So it's not, we just don't have this. It didn't just fall upon us from the sky. I mean, this is an example of, and so to your question, whether it be about racism or sexism, just as a white man, what could you do in that kind of situation before women had the right to vote or before women were respected as equals in this more pervasive way? And we still have a lot to do. But what could you do as a white male? Well, you could speak up for women. Utilitarian philosophers did this on liberty.
But didn't they do that back in the day?
Yeah.
So it seems like from what I've heard from a number of different guests, there's this air that white people still have a sin to atone for, in a sense. That would be the best way that I could put it.
Yeah.
And that sin has now fallen onto this generation, and they need to atone for that, for the sins of their ancestors, or however you want to phrase that. And that to me just doesn't quite click. I don't understand that reasoning.
What happened, if you're using slavery as an example, or denying women the right to vote, or disrespecting women based on their color or their sexual orientation or whatever, if you're, it is sinful. But that's not the focus. It's not about individual sin falling on people's shoulders. It's about a social problem that needs to be addressed, and we cannot address that social problem until we take responsibility collectively for looking at it and for doing what we can. That might mean marching with the suffragettes as you know.
No, I understand in the context of the day. So if women still didn't have the right to vote, helping them would be extremely beneficial. But in terms of our current society, it seems like we're still grappling with what plagued us in the past, even though we've already progressed past that point.
Well, I don't know if we we have progressed. And let me give you an example. When you look at some, and you can see footage of this, of the civil rights movement and marches by people like Martin Luther King. How many of those people were white marching with him? Look at it. Not very many. Look at the demonstrations of the early Black Lives Matter movement. Not right now where it's been like hijacked, I'm sorry to say. There were people of all colors ages, sexes. I mean, you talk about a difference. I mean, I remember seeing footage of the early civil rights movement. I was, obviously very young, but saw it later, and also did the philosophy forum, on that. And so we got to look at some of this stuff. There is so much more awareness and inclusion in the people who are doing the supporting of the African American cause, right?
See, that awareness thing, that's come up a couple times, and one of my fears is that we are more aware today, absolutely, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we are more aware of fewer problems. And so each problem is now blown into a significantly bigger size than it would have been realistically,
Right.
because we can all focus on this one thing. And so now we've made a mountain out of this molehill,
Well,
in a sense.
You see, I would say the mountain is a mountain. The mountain is a mountain that we're actually seeing as a mountain, which rests on, yes, a history, and things have improved, right? So, and I would want to say that, but you'll find in the improvement a lot of really ugly stuff that continues, and that's what we're not acknowledging when we say, "Oh, I'm not responsible." We're not acknowledging that still exists, and that it needs to be rectified. And again,
so what would be the goal of it? What is the progression to the end? Would the end state look like there are no more racist people in America? Is that, what are we working? Because it seems like the sentiment is that we still have more work to do. But what does that end point look like in society?
I would leave it as an open question. Certainly, you can do the theory, do the general, which is eliminate racism, which is the prejudiced. Or,
but is that realistic?
I don't care whether it's realistic or not. We do the best we can. I don't think, really, the goal is progress. And again, this is a easy word to throw around. We hear people calling themselves progressive. It's like, what? Which is self-aggrandizing, if anything was. But it's just, for a society like this, and that's all I can focus on, a society like this, what unifies us is basic rights articulated in the Constitution and things that govern that. I mean, the Bill of Rights, for example. Yeah, they're very specific. Well, I want to say specific. That's not. They're spelled out. But then, how do we implement that in a way that is consistent with the rest of the document? So that's part of who we are, is to respect all persons as having equal rights to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, right? How do we implement that? And I think, I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear. I mean, I don't think there's going to be a panacea at the end of the day where we end up being, but we've got to do the work that we can, without presuming that we're the only person in the world that has the right view, because we can learn a thing or two. And that's part of what the forum is all about. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure.
No, but I understand the sentiment. I think race for me is a very interesting topic, just because, I've only grown up in the world that I've grown up in its current state.
Uh-huh.
And I was born in 97, and, I've lived a relatively short life.
Yeah.
And in my perception of the world, it seems like when I was younger, race was not as big of an issue. It felt like we had almost progressed through it. And now it feels like it's coming back up in this weird way.
Yeah, it's a big issue because people are actually demanding that they have a voice and that they have the same rights.
But what rights? I mean, we all have the same rights right now.
Well, we can say that, right? We can look at it. That's what, as a society, we're supposed to be committed to. But as far as the opportunities and the implementation of those rights, that's a different story altogether. And that's part of what we have to look at. That's part of what a good education involves is, okay, let's take a look at this. It doesn't mean that we do so uncritically, because, like I said, people can have very different positions and can have conversations about those differences in a way that is meaningful and mutually enriching. You don't have to be, at each other's throats, but what we need to do is be willing to come to terms, not just where we as individuals may have these prejudices or these practices that marginalize certain people, certain groups, but where our culture still does, and take responsibility for making changes where we can, and where we ought to, right? That's where we kind of leave it a little bit of an open question. I gave the example. Was it Alan Alda, the lead actors of MASH, who had 3 daughters, and basically he was an advocate for the Equal Rights Amendment. And of course, then the Equal Rights Amendment was targeted to supporting women's rights, and more specifically, white women's rights. Let's be real, okay? But that's an example of being an ally. We call this being an ally, but it's not just, well, I agree with you. It's being willing and committed to doing whatever it is within your power, responsibly, I'll say, and justly, whatever version you have of that, to live into that, and to make your world, to make your culture live into that, to have your culture live into it. And when you start making things happen, it's not always So again, another example I gave is all of the people. Oh, just think about it. Just in the recent years, the women's movement. It was where there were people in every single country represented by this in support of women's existence, women's rights. I mean, it's such a different world now, and we're making headway, which for us, I think, is allowing more people to participate, and I want to say reasonably, right, and responsibly, in this process of creating culture, being a part of any educational forum, but being a part of the world we live in. So yeah, if I didn't answer this, could you please maybe bring the question up in a way that allows me to address it? Because I think what we do have is we have blind spots, and the only reason I know this is because I have them myself, right?
Blind spots in terms of race?
Yeah, whatever. I mean, whatever it is, it's like, oh wow, the changing language, respecting the pronouns people want to be called by. That was an issue when I was growing up. It was a non-issue. You were male or you were female. Certainly weren't both, and you certainly weren't both in a way that was clearly controversial.
But the pronoun is a perfect example. Don't you think that's the mountain out of the molehill situation?
Not for people who don't want to be misgendered.
Yeah, but in terms of severity of it, and in terms of impact issue-wise, that's pretty minor. What somebody calls you is now this existential threat, in a sense.
No, I understand what you're saying. And again, I think that's a great example of somebody who, if they're misgendered, just politely say, just correct the person doing the misgendering. I mean, what does it take? We're civilized human beings. I shouldn't use that word, right? That's got its own problematic connotations these days. But, if we really want the best, we just say, hey, please call me she, or call me he, or call me they. Well, now they is a singular term. It didn't used to be a singular term, or at least generally speaking, it wasn't used as a singular term. Now it's routine, right? So you don't have to say he or she. You don't have to accept this radical mutual exclusivity between what it is to be a male and what it is to be a female. Right? It's like, but we're changing the way we think, which is reflected in how we use language. We're changing how we use language in a positive way here by taking the sex out of the pronoun.
Do you think that that is a societal shift in the sense that it is emergent just out of the direction we're going, or do you think that is a forced adoption?
I think it's emergent. I think we say it's forced only because we haven't seen the history and what people have had to go through. I talked to you about the suffragettes and, you know, what people have had to go through to have this kind of respect. And you know, if it were important to you, well, then, you know, you would probably see that. I mean, it would be like someone. Okay, this is a bad example, but referring to you as a girl or she is like, whoa, wait a minute, right?
But see, that wouldn't bother me.
Right.
I would just assume. I would just as quickly not even correct them. I would just keep going about my. I mean, if we were in a conversation like this and you said she, I would probably correct you once or twice. But if you just kept doing it, I would say, okay, she's maybe struggling with something. I don't know. It's not going to affect my day.
Well, I would say if it is important to people, and it is important to people because they haven't had the privilege of being a male, a white male who has not been misgendered. They haven't had that. I don't say privilege. That's an overworked word. You know,
that's like fascist.
Yeah, it's just like you can presume that if someone calls you a girl or a she, that they're making a mistake. And now people make mistakes, but this is not what's going on here. This is a deeper phenomenon. It's a social phenomenon of changing the way people think, which is reflected that is reflected in how they talk, and it's very, very important to some people for reasons that you might not be able to identify with because they're not your reasons.
But yes, I like the way that is phrased. It's very important to some people, but not to others for various reasons. I'm fascinated. The race and the emergence of transgenderism in today's society, I find fascinating. I think it's almost an interesting case study to see how society reacts in some sense as you were watching these things unfold.
Right.
My fear at large with society is that in claiming we're pursuing this diverse and unified culture, what we're really doing is we're creating and sowing division under the banner of unity and equality and all of these things. But what we're really doing is trying to divide people into smaller and smaller boxes.
Yeah, I understand.
And to give everyone a plight, a struggle that they now have to fight for instead of coming together and working towards something actually tangible. Like, okay, let's bring up people in poverty. Let's look at economic status. Let's make education more accessible. Let's do these real tangible things that would have a positive impact across these categories. Now it's no, we need to focus on this minority group and then we'll move to this one and then this one. And the results aren't tangible for everyone unless you were in this significantly smaller and smaller box of people.
Right. But you see, this should be tangible to all of us insofar as we could be that person if we had been born in a different body, or if we were born in a body that, you know, would, I guess it really depends, but, you know, people who feel like they're born in the wrong body for whatever reason, or you're born in a black body, or you're born in a female body. Again, these are real general categories. I got it, right? But it doesn't matter that I don't want to put it that way. As a white woman, I should still be concerned about my fellow human being.
But doesn't that right there, isn't that a show that we are devolving as a society, that you have to use that as a white woman, that you have to open up with that you can't just say, hey, as me, as you know, as who I am in this moment, this is what I think. Now you have to quantify it. You have to say, I am this person from this specific background with these perceived privileges. Let me just acknowledge this. Let me say I'm sorry, and then we can move on to the conversation.
Right. Well, you see, I would start with I'm a white woman. Why? Because I am, and that sets a context for any conversation we can have around these sorts of issues. I'm not going to open up every conversation I have as, by the way, as a white woman. But when we're talking about race or gender, that's important to frame, because as a female, I have not been able to just assume the opportunities, and I will just say here, using this term appropriately, in my experience, the privileges that my male colleagues have, and I'm not just talking about philosophy department. I've just seen it. It's like and experienced it, and that makes a difference. I know that the same is true based on their own testimony, many of the African American students that I've had, many of the African American teachers and professors that I've come to know. Their experience is different, and to the degree that we have different experiences, formatively, hence different values and interests, we can't just presume anything. You can say, well, as me, well, who am I? Is it relevant to the conversation that I say that I'm white or that I'm a woman or identify as cisgender, which is I identify as a female, which is what I was designated at birth. And you say, well, what is going on here? Are we not doing, is this not creating? It's important for the people who don't identify in a manner that they were designated or identified at birth. It's very, very important. That's what the whole issue of transgender rights is involving today, and among many, many other things. But, and a lot of this stuff is just politicized. We say, what we as a culture, we as a society, is a lot of that's just pumped to us through or given to us through politics, through the news and things like that do tend to kind of respond to certain things in certain ways that load the issue. And again, I'm not putting this very well, but in a way that does draw our attention to it, but in a way that's not productive. That's actually destructive. Transgender rights is a great example of this. It's the backpedaling, the backwardness of some of the legislation on we are hell or whole water. We're not going to talk about this. We're not going to let our children know about that because lo and behold, it might be something that they identify with or will identify with. We give them the idea. But so having a conversation, an education about what that involves, who are the experts there? Transgender people. 2 examples here. Fantastic. Also, and I'm looking at this because it's actually I can give you the name of the books. Janet Mock, who has become, since her keynote and discussion with Jessica Pettit in 2014, Jessica was asking questions and Janet would respond. Great forum on sex, gender, and the self. And Janet Mock is the author of Redefining Realness. Of course, she was also a key player in a couple of the episodes of the production of Dahmer. She's really taken off.
Oh, wow.
She's taken off in increasing awareness around the unique experience, not just of African Americans. She's a person of color, but she's a trans person of color. So that's a different kind of experience than, say, the next speaker, also fantastic, Jennifer Finney Boylan. Now, why do I say white transgender woman and trans advocate? Because she's not Janet Mock. Janet Mock is an African American, so her experience is going to be different, even though they're both trans people, right? They're both trans women, to be more precise. So, it makes a difference. So there are things that overlap. There are things that we share, but there are also things that diversify, differentiate us in certain key ways. Yeah, you need to say it, not just presume that you're going to be the default position of what it means to be a person in America, which was white and male. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get the argument.
Okay.
I would still need to sit on how I feel. It is an interesting time for human relations in this country. I think you could sum it up to say.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily want to stop you, but
I'm
we're at
fine.
an hour and a half right now.
Can we go in a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah,
Just a little bit?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I wasn't very concise and probably repeated myself a lot. But
no, I've been enjoying our discussion.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention a couple of other things. 2013, the forum was on ethics, animals, and the environment. Our keynote speaker is Peter Singer. The the author of Animal Liberation, among many other titles, internationally renowned utilitarian philosopher, came here and just graciously was able to come and present and spend actually the next day with us as well, looking around at the beautiful environment that we live in. He and his lovely wife came with him, so it was really very nice to have them, both of them, here. I've mentioned Janet Mock, Jennifer Finney Boylan. 2018, you may have heard of this person too. An urban food revolution was the topic, and the keynote speaker was Ron Finley, also known as a gangsta gardener, guerrilla farmer in South Central LA. He's got a great TED Talk. I'll leave you all of this stuff in case you want to look it up.
And are the previous talks, are they recorded so people can find them online, or?
No. And that was kind of before the days that recordings were so pervasive, and a lot of the folks didn't want to be recorded. They wanted it to be, unrecorded, spontaneous conversations, and there's also, because this is a performance out of or productions out of Center Arts and the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and I think there are sometimes restrictions around by the presenters themselves. Oh, we have to be recorded. No, you can't record this. No, this is my. I don't.
Almost intellectual property in a sense.
Yeah, and I'm not sure whether the Center Arts would be have those sorts of restrictions, but I don't think none of these have been recorded, except for maybe George Yancey's. But I don't know if that. I'm not sure if even that was. So let me just put that as a pause. Another person, 2019, Sexual Awareness in Contemporary Times. The keynote for that was Tarana Burke. She was the actual the actual originator of the Me Too movement. She was. The whole thing blew up again in 2012, and it blew up. I think that was, it was a good movement, and it still is an important movement. She has a TED Talk, but she created a support group for women. She's an African American woman who created the support group for other females, mostly, I think, in the basement of her church, a support group for women. And you can start, girls and women. It's like, this problem's a lot more pervasive. That's another example as, oh God, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. No, actually sexual assault, sexual violence is a thing.
I would say that is in itself a mountain. I don't think you're making a mountain out of a molehill. The pronoun thing is more of a molehill.
Understood, but not for a person who, the thing is, a person who responds to you can be doing it inappropriately, right? They're like, excuse me, that would be they. It's like, be nice. Be nice. Part of it is that we're not being respectful to one another. I've seen this, and it's not, that wasn't an extreme example, but I've seen this before. If somebody misgenders you or misidentifies you in terms of your race or ethnicity or sexual orientation, whatever it is, be kind and let them know who you are. Right? Doesn't mean you don't have to say anything, but with Tarana Burke, she came to speak and just did a beautiful job. One of the pictures you have that I gave you was of the meet and greet with her, a number of the students. And you can see how diverse that group was, just a number of students who came to see her. So 2019, 2020. Unfortunately, John Leguizamo was not able to come, as we've spoken about.
Thanks to COVID.
Yeah, and George Yancey, who who's great, and this was he was part of the President Speaker Series as well. Wonderful person, very kind, very respectful, and very informative. And I will, if you don't find it, I will definitely look up that as Dear White America or something. I'm not going to go down that path again, but it's really.
I'll check it out.
Yeah, or I'll send it to you. And of course, Whitney Phillips, who I spoke to you about, again, cutting edge, groundbreaking work, right? Her work was the first on this, the material of mapping the relationship between online trolling and
so you guys have had quite a number of very impactful people
absolutely
be a part of the forum.
Absolutely. I mean, without a doubt. And I want to thank Center Arts for that. I also want to thank the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences for supporting us, and of course the President's office in helping, at least with Professor Yancey's. And they've been supportive. I mean, they've been supportive right along. So, I couldn't do this alone. I tried to, and it's groveling for money and trying to apply for grants that weren't received for all kinds of, in my view, in a couple of is at least one nefarious reasons. But you get some, you don't get some. I really am indebted to Center Arts for doing this work cooperatively. And we actually used to be working with associated students that went by the wayside. But can't say enough good things about Center Arts and the folks that make that office work. Let me say one more thing about the upcoming talk on Wednesday, Patagonia. You've seen the flyer, right? And you have a copy of it. 7 p.m. this Wednesday in the Van Duzer Theater. Van Duzer Theater. It's going to be wonderful. I said here just briefly, let me say the intro again. This one here, when Wiley, he, him, aka Patagonia, she, her, has made waves over the past few years as a drag queen advocating for the environment. It does it in a fascinating way, I want to say here. People love Patty for her comedy and dancing, but also for her powerful honesty and vulnerability when addressing issues of inclusion and climate. And just a wonderful presenter, from what I can tell, wonderful person. So please come on Wednesday if you can make it. Was there something? Did you want me to say anything? The Philosophy Forum, awesome forum. Not just a university forum, but also a community forum in many ways. Lots of people come for these talks. Is there anything else you would want me to address or say anything? Or is that
I think
said enough? You have said enough.
No, yeah. we put in some time. We did an hour and 40 minutes. I really enjoyed our talk. Yeah. I think I agree with the sentiment that philosophy is a foundational science, in the sense that I really think that the ability to formulate a coherent argument that is based and has sound support, I think that is incredibly important. I think it's a skill that we've lost in some sense nowadays. I think a lot of people go into philosophy almost as this intellectual exercise rather than something that is practical that they can apply to their life.
Yeah.
And I think we're kind of struggling because we don't have that foundation to hold critical discourse anymore. I think that's inherent in our society nowadays.
Yeah, and I think you really hit it on the head there. Philosophy is the mothership. You were talking about how we're getting too many boxes, right? Too many boxes. Well, if you look at it, and this is no disrespect to any of the social sciences. Please don't get me wrong. Or even science. Science is a modern invention, as we see it now. It's a modern phenomenon. The social sciences, the so-called softer sciences, of course, they don't like to hear that. It's comes from the so-called hard sciences. These are modern inventions. Where do we start? With something really very, very general, but a method. East and West, and again, that's a huge vagary of making a distinction about the world we live in. But philosophy is the mothership, and all of these have become in the quest for preciseness and specificity. Coming up with new methods for understanding the world, and that's where we are now. But you don't stop doing what philosophy allows us to do, and always has, which is to think reflectively, responsibly about the world we live in.
Okay, well, Mary, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Nick Flores. I appreciate that very, very much. And hopefully I didn't go on too long.
No, it was great.
All right.
Do you want to plug any online resources, anything where people can find the forum, find a website for it or anything?
Center Arts. It's Center Arts, Cal Poly Humboldt 2023 Philosophy Forum. You go to Center Arts. It's fairly widely available. And let's see.
And try to make it out this Wednesday, 7 p.m. if you can.
This Wednesday, 7 p.m.
Fun.
Van Duzer Theater. Tickets are free for students. Bring your ID or contact Michael Moore at Center Arts to get your electronic copy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is fun.